There are a legion of these types of videos. I won't pretend like I'm adding some divine revelation to this topic. But I don't know how many people have rated high-end in both Final Fantasy XIV and World of Warcraft. I am sure plenty have. Echo and Limit, well, now called Liquid, have both played these games at a high level, in addition to many others. The perspective I offer, however, might be vaguely more relatable. I rated Mythic in WoW, and while I never cleared it at some super competitive speed, we weren't necessarily slouches who got carried by gear either. I did Mythic for a few tiers, going from BFA into the first tier of Shadowlands, where I eventually sorta just gave up on raiding. I then started playing Final Fantasy XIV and working my way slowly through the story. After a couple of months, I finally reached the end of Shadowbringers and did the final Savage tier with the static that I am now in, called Loud and Fast. In WoW, I primarily played melee DPS, where in 14 I've taken to tanking. Point is, I'm way closer to midcore. I don't go nuts for parsing, although I do enjoy it, and I just try not to be the one holding people back. But there are a lot of differences in how raids and raiding generally work in both games. If you're a WoW player looking at trying Final Fantasy XIV, or vice versa, I hope to maybe be a window or portal into both worlds. I'll also try to keep my personal bias out of this. The pros and cons will probably still weigh in favor of 14 because it just really is the game I enjoy right now. That being said, I played both and I enjoyed both games. Besides, most of the reason I left WoW was because I just couldn't support Activision Blizzard. And to be clear, I don't mean to say that you're a bad person if you want to play WoW. It was a very personal decision for me to not play Activision Blizzard games anymore. Maybe that'll change in the future. We will see. Comparing how the rating feels and what matters is a difficult feat. I think some people try to do this by saying which one is harder or easier, which is kind of a colossal waste of time if you ask me. Just problematic trying to say which one's harder because they're just different games. The first reason comparing is difficult, and probably the biggest singular difference, is the player count. Endgame raids in Final Fantasy XIV contain 8 players, 2 tanks, 2 healers, and 4 DPS. Mythic raiding, the serious difficulty of WoW, is 20 people, 2 tanks, 3 to 5 healers, and the rest are DPS. So right away, we're talking huge differences. It's way easier to recruit for Final Fantasy XIV, because it's fewer players. No bench is really needed. If you have an absence, you can usually handle it just by finding someone on Party Finder. In WoW, you have to recruit a bench for 1 to 2 people, and it's not really a desirable place to be, this bench. Also, factor in that some classes bring buffs that you must have. Namely, Warrior, Demon Hunter, Monk, Priest, and a Mage. They all bring damage buffs that you must have. Other classes bring raid utility, some of which are always useful, and some of which are situational. Recruitment can feel really bad if your class seems to be out of the meta or not have this utility. That being said, recruitment was never impossible. It could just feel a little bit more difficult if what you wanted to play wasn't meta or didn't have that utility. And while they are fixing it next patch, a percentage of the player base could never raid with you because they played on the opposite faction, and faction swaps were never cheap. In 14, the only thing you must ideally have for content is as follows. You need to have 2 different tanks that are 2 different jobs, you need a shield healer and a pure healer, and you need 4 DPS, among of which you must have a melee, a ranged physical, and a caster. The 4th one doesn't really matter. The important thing is that you have these different roles represented, so you have an extra 4% damage buff. Most people in the community see this damage buff as necessary. Ideally, you would have no repeats of the same job. Having 2 samurai, for instance, affects generation of a resource called Limit Break. It is generally a lot less restrictive, so recruitment and pugging in general is also a lot easier. So, 8-man versus 20-man, huge difference right off the bat. And actual raid design seems to follow from this difference, so fights in WoW will be a lot more hectic. A lot of stuff will be happening at the same time. While each moving part might not be complicated by itself, accomplishing everything in tandem is more difficult. Some events are mechanics trigger based off of time, others off boss death and health, and other triggers. Randomness is way more prevalent in these raids. That isn't to say it's bad, but if I am here making woeful analogies, WoW raiding is like jazz improvisation. There is structure, but what happens within that structure can be quite a bit more hectic and chaotic. There was a fight in Castle Nathria about 2 tiers ago called Council of Blood. Let me give you a taste of the kind of stuff that would happen in that fight, At any one point in time, there would be a mechanic, where certain players must jump to clear a debuff that would kill them otherwise, but jumping does raid-wide damage. Healer cooldowns must be coordinated to deal with this. One of the 3 main bosses will occasionally dash from one tank to the other, giving a debuff and requiring a tank swap. Melee must avoid the dash or get killed instantly. An additional enemy will show up and shield the boss, preventing you from DPSing them. You gotta kill that ad or you won't make the DPS check. An interrupt must go out every 20 to 25 seconds at the start of the fight, for quite a long portion of the fight, or a lot of damage will go out and you'll wipe. The fight gets more complicated as each boss of the trio dies, where finally you're dealing with a tank ad that must be kited or burned, smaller ads that must be AoE'd before they get out of hand, and even more stuff could happen depending on what order the bosses are killed. There's a lot of stuff to dodge, and then there's a final burn after a marathon of a fight. This was a 10-minute fight, which is considered pretty long in World of Warcraft. Of course, this is just one fight. A Mythic raid in WoW will have anywhere from 7 to 12 more of these, all ranging in difficulty. Council of Blood and other raid end bosses happen to be quite a bit longer, but a lot of the raid fights are more around the 5 to 6 minute mark. The mechanics are really interesting and thematic at any point in time. I really do miss the creativity from WoW's raid design team. I think they clearly put stuff in the game that they want players to have fun with. The latest raid has a fight that vaguely plays like the game Among Us, where you must find the raider with a secret debuff, lest it kills your entire raid. So, with that idea, let's talk about how Final Fantasy XIV fights usually go. Most of them focus around beating up one target, with little variety in that regard. Most of the fights are also longer, ranging from 9 minutes or longer. Each Saboteur releases 4 bosses, with the final boss usually having 2 parts to it. So, in a vague sense, it feels to me like there's 5 bosses a tier. If I'm trying to keep my woeful music analogy alive, if WoW is like jazz improvisation, 14 raiding is like a classical dance. Mechanics are way more complicated, and there's less going on at any second, and the mechanics are very deterministic and not random. Some of the best mechanics feel like an elaborate puzzle that must be solved. Very precise timings on how a mechanic must be resolved, with precise movements and places a player must stand. Dying is a DPS loss of great proportions, and some mechanics will wipe the raid out if performed incorrectly. So a lot less forgiving, but at the same time, one complicated mech is usually the only thing going on at one time. Remember how I mentioned 14 raiding is 8-man versus WoW's 20? Almost as a direct result, each raid member in 14 will have more personal responsibility. If you're a WoW Mythic player watching this video, you probably know that person in your raid who you felt like was holding your team away from a clear. That person who you pray would not get the mechanic, because they usually messed it up. That person who would screw up Phase 1 mechanics while you were progging in Phase 3. If you don't know who that person is, congrats! You are that person. All joking aside, in 14, mechanics rely on perfect or near-perfect execution from all members. You can't really have a person not understand what is going on, or you'll never clear. Carrying is much harder. I gave an example of WoW, now how about one from 14? This boss is named Hesperos, and in this clip, he's about to do a mechanic called Actanthai, Act 2. This is probably the hardest single mechanic of the current raid tier. You can see the entire stage light up, signaling that these towers, or future stack markers, will either generate AoEs or need to be soaked. Slightly later, he signals in what order the towers will either blow up or need to be soaked. If that wasn't enough, he also puts little tethers on players. Broken purple tethers trigger a magic vuln on the whole raid. Orange triggers a soak that must occur with at least 2 or 3 people, ideally 3. And green tethers will kill the 2 players who have them if the tether is broken. Sounds pretty complicated, right? However, after a couple of pulls, our raid team figured out that purple always goes on a tank and a healer pair, and the other tank healer pair getting orange. The green tether always goes on a DPS pair, and the remaining pair is always orange. Oh, so that's fairly deterministic. Also, he either blows up east and west first, or north and south first. Oh, that is also highly deterministic. So there are only 4 ways this mechanic can go. We can map out both sets, and then draw out how you must resolve each mechanic and get each soak, depending on the color you got. So after trial and error, we can execute this mechanic easily. You know, barring any clowning, which totally doesn't happen because my static is super serious and never makes any mistakes ever, Final Fantasy XIV reclears are pretty easy. But you might be getting my overall point about why trying to figure out which is harder is more trouble than it's worth. They are just different flavors of raiding. If one sounds more like your style, go for it. But stick around to the end of the video, because it isn't the only thing different about Endgame between the two. Oh, also, please subscribe, like, and then comment below with your crazy wild hot takes. I want to hear them. Okay, let's talk about actually getting into raid. This is probably the one big reason I like 14 over WoW. Off the gate, it seems to start the same. If you really wanted to zoom into raiding in both games, you can buy a level boost, and in 14, a story skip. You play through the latest expansion, and hitting level cap will more or less give you access to the endgame raids. For 14, you gotta hit the min eye level requirement, which is equal to that tier's crafted set. Yep, you can just go onto the market board and buy an entire gear set, or you could make it yourself, that puts you at the relevant eye level to raid, and also clear. The world first Final Fantasy XIV team cleared in mostly crafted gear. The DPS checks in Savage are just not aggressively high, not like they are in the Ultimate fight. It's all about mechanical execution. The crafted set can be somewhat pricey on the first week of the raid tier, but they drop quickly. The normal version of the raid also drops gear of similar eye level that is slightly weaker, due to having less materia slots. They're kind of like gem slots if you play WoW. The full set can range anywhere from 300k to 500k, which can sound like a lot, but it's not too bad. And again, normal raids can get you gear as well. This gear will put you at the item level appropriate for fighting any boss in the Savage difficulty. Getting into Savage does not take very long at all. Ultimates are the most difficult fights in Final Fantasy XIV. WoW players can probably think of these as mythic end bosses. Lengthwise, they are longer fights and probably represent more prog than the typical mythic end boss. The older expansion ultimates can be challenged and still generally represent the difficulty they held upon release, and can be challenged at any time. As of making this video, the new ultimate, Dragon Song War, will release in 2 weeks. In order to feasibly challenge it, you'll have to have your bested slot. So let me talk about gear acquisition in Final Fantasy XIV. Gear in 14 is largely deterministic too. Raids will drop coffers, which automatically grant your job appropriate gear for a specific slot. You get a chance to roll on loot once per boss per week. If luck isn't on your side, you will also get an item for your clear, which can be traded for the same gear. That being said, while accessories require 4 clears to get an accessory, the weapon or chest piece requires 8 weeks of clears to get your weapon. If you don't get lucky early on, and roll high on need, well, at least you know you'll get your best in slot weapon in 8 weeks, no matter what. Supplementary to the raid gear is called Tome Gear. Doing virtually any content in the game on a max level character, like PvP, killing rares called hunts, dungeons, raiding, will grant you tomes, currency which can buy decent, just below max item level gear. This can be upgraded with special materials that drop from raiding Savage, unfortunately, that you also have to roll on. Often your best in slot will be a mix of raid gear and tome gear. So deterministic, but a bit slow at the offset. It's relatively quicker if you have a static raid group, but if you're pugging it, luck may or may not be on your side. So to summarize, if you're dedicated to it, you can probably get raiding within a week. If you're just decided to just buy a story skip instead. Obviously playing through the entire main story quest is more lengthy, and by lengthy I mean months, but I find it pretty enjoyable. And hey, you play how you want to. If you only care about endgame content, 14 presents no real obstacle to that. So, now let's talk about World of Warcraft. Let me be clear, I left WoW in one part because it felt like I had a lot to do a bunch of unfun stuff to raid. I wanted to play the content I wanted to, not spam some mindless content or do weird and unsatisfying dailies to not fall behind on the power curve. But as of writing this, WoW is full force in patch 9.2. Many of the raiders still playing WoW I've talked to feel like the WoW endgame is incredibly accessible right now. So this section will be a lot more positive than I expected. That being said, I am wary. WoW's track record is that the final patch of an X-Pack features the most catch-up mechanics, and greatest amount of accessibility. It is usually by the end of an expansion that WoW fixes its many systems and makes them free and lets players experiment. I'll try to summarize the perspective of someone who just wants to raid as quickly as possible in WoW. Someone who buys a level boost to get to the cap of level 60. First, you must complete, let us call it the 9.0 WoW main story quest, or MSQ. This is about 8 quests or so that introduce you to the systems that were introduced in that patch. They show you a roguelike game called Torghast, an endgame zone called the Maw, and they show you how to make one piece of legendary armor that you will need later. Then you go right into 9.1 MSQ, which is actually just one quest. It takes you to Korthia. That place is no longer relevant from a player power perspective, so the game skips over it. I cannot stress that this literally takes a minute to complete. You are now at the latest patch MSQ. This takes place over 7 chapters, which takes approximately 4 hours to complete in total. But it gives you a bunch of stuff over the course of that questline, most notably catch-up gear and currency you need to get a second legendary. They also award you with a reputation towards a particular faction. Final Fantasy XIV players, think of this as Beast Tribe rep. This rep gives us our second and final legendary piece. We're definitely strong now, but we must obtain our actual best-in-slot legendary, which can come from a variety of sources, though few actually require much effort. Many of the legendary recipes drop from the normal mode of dungeons. Imagine if you had to go and clear, say, Vanaspati to get your best-in-slot legendary recipe. We also need to buy and make the crafted piece from the auction house. This isn't very expensive, ranging from 20k to 30k gold. Then we acquire Cosmic Flux, which currently acts like the aforementioned Final Fantasy XIV tomes. It can be acquired from doing almost anything in the Shadowlands. Torghast, PvP, dungeons, harder dungeon modes called Mythic Plus, simple world quests, the normal mode of the raid. Pick what you like to do and just do it. After crafting this piece, you're basically ready to raid on the heroic difficulty. Your item level might be a little low, but some of the aforementioned content has probably brought your item level up. You'll want to do your dailies in the 9.2 zone, because it will get you that rep we talked about to Revered. And it gives you access to an item that allows all of your alt characters to catch up more quickly. You could grind this rep, but the 3 daily world quests is the highest yield, lowest effort way of getting there in just a single week. Then you're basically done. Raid heroic until your item level's appropriate enough, and then you'll need to find a guild to raid mythic with. All in all, with some hustle you can raid heroic within the week, maybe 2. It is definitely comparable to being able to raid Savage within a week. Surely the greatest obstacle for a while was also tier pieces. These are pieces of armor that when equipped together give your character a massive boost in raw damage. You can't pass this up, and you will definitely want to eventually acquire the 2 set and the 4 set to chew up heroic difficulty, and begin to challenge mythic difficulty. Thankfully, WoW just released a method to also craft these pieces as well. The versions of these pieces also exist in normal and looking for raid difficulty, and are still stronger than normal pieces, even if their item level is lacking. You can generally detect one major con of WoW. Gear is largely not deterministic, and you are up to the whim of fates when trying to get your best in slot. If we compare the amount of time and effort to raid Mythic and WoW and the amount of time and effort to raid Ultimate, they are currently comparable. That will shock you, but I attribute more to the fact that patch 9.2 is the final patch of Shadowlands, and devs have been historically kinder on final patches in catch-up mechanics. It may or may not also have something to do with the recent publicity about losing subs to 14. Hey, if Blizzard wants to steal ideas of accessibility from 14, that is welcome and encouraged. No shame in trying to make a game better and more fun. Well, that basically wraps up my video today. Big shout out to Frenchie WoW for letting me borrow all of his content and clips. Be sure to check him out on Twitch, the link will be shown in the description and in a comment. I tried to lay it down what the endgame looks without presenting too much bias. At the end of the day, you're just going to have to look and just kind of play what you think is fun. I think both games are actually in a pretty decent state right now, if I'm being completely honest. I'm just paying 1 right now because I'm not really the kind of person who can keep up 2 subs. Anywho, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and make sure to be safe out there, everyone.